Hello everyone, this will be my final words on the suicide note of Mitchell Heisman and the analysis and reading that I've just done as a general analysis of what the writing is. A very interesting look into what I would describe the mind of someone who is greatly disturbed, someone who has taken the black pill to its extreme conclusion, which is, of course, suicide, because he cannot find a justification for his life any longer. I really think this illustrates the harm that nihilism is doing to the Western man, and that even though some of his ideas are interesting to think about, especially the historical analysis of the Anglo-Saxon sort of cultural, political, or socio-cultural revolt against the Norman conquest, it's very interesting. I don't agree with all of the things he said about Christianity, but it brings up some interesting almond activators, things to think about, something that really sits in your brain. You gotta kind of let it stew for a minute. Not only this, but it's almost reaffirms my initial idea several years ago that there was going to be a culmination of two political schools of thought that would be at war with one another. And the first one, of course, is the transhumanist or post-humanist Marxist, liberal or leftist ideology. That is one of transforming egalitarian into its ultimate form, which would be to the uploading of human consciousness into non-organic material or supercomputers in the form of what Heisman describes as the God AI. And of course, the other side of this argument, which is the biological foundation, sort of the right-wing principles of National Socialism and various other forms, where we take the stance of there is a biological reason why things exist, and we should try and interpret them and lead humanity down a positive path and not try and upset the balance of nature in the world. This work also, interestingly enough, almost reaffirms, it's a more of a substantive claim, that I have this idea in my head swishing around, and please help me out if you think there's any credence to this, that the Christian Revolution, the fact that Christianity took hold of the West, sort of transmogrified exactly what our direction in life was going to be, whether it was going to be natural or naturally occurring social hierarchies and authority hierarchies, or the de-evolution of civilization into this egalitarian sort of liberal democracy worldview. And that there seems to be, when you apply the principles of Christianity over time and you see the transformation of this, and you go into the Enlightenment and the Reformation, you see things like brotherhood for all men, and we're all created in the image of God, and that there is no distinction between peoples. This sort of we're all one race, the human race, this type of logical conclusion of the egalitarianism of Christianity. Now, it was not always interpreted that way, and it does not have to be interpreted that way, but that does seem to be sort of a logical conclusion of some of Christ's teachings within the Bible, within the gospel that was set down by man. Another thing that this really kind of opens my eyes to, again, is another idea that I've kind of picked up on in the past couple of years, is that there is a distinct divide between the Anglo or Anglican worldview of democracy and individualism and the sort of Germanic or Nordic version of collectivism. I don't want to use the word collectivism, but this sort of collective idealism that a lot of Germanic and Nordic people have. It's funny that he would bring up the Anglo-Jewish connection, because it's a popular meme nowadays that there is the eternal Anglo, and that the Anglosphere is working in accordance with Judaic principles or Zionist principles. You can see this through the support of the United States and England and Australia and Canada to Israel. Strangely enough, this sort of coincides with my own life as someone whose ancestors were both Anglo-Saxon, English gentry, and Germanic, Nordic sort of soldiers and peasantry and landed gentry. There seems to be this internal force fighting within me between individualism, the sort of libertarianism that I used to ascribe to for many, many years, the sort of liberal democracy or leftism even in my earliest years, and the fervent right-wing collective idealism that presides on the other side. There seems to be an internal conflict within me that really adheres to this principle, or not principle, but story that Heisman lays out between the Anglo-Saxon and the Germanic/Nordic worldview. Interestingly enough, and I hate to name drop here, but Sargon of Akkad even brought up, when he was debating Andrew Anglin, his almost hatred of Germanic peoples in sort of screwing up his liberal democratic worldview. He sees himself as an Anglo, and he obviously has Anglican roots. Him sort of hating on or in opposition to the Germanic collective idealism is very interesting here, because there seems to be a lot of this talk throughout the past 100 years that hasn't really been addressed by anybody, except, as far as I can tell, Heisman and maybe Spengler and Yoki. This idea that there's a divide between the Anglosphere and the Germanic sphere. And neither of these were explicitly said, but in the case of Heisman, he definitely explicitly says that there's a divide in thought, and even sort of delves into the historical reason why there is this divide. Now, whether or not I believe that the conquered Anglo-Saxons were somehow trying to subvert the Norman aristocracy, I simply don't know enough to entertain that thought, but it is very interesting to think about. But here's my primary takeaway from reading this person's writing. To combat nihilism, to combat the decline of the Western world, if you really care about your people and your history and their future, to combat the sort of nihilistic thought that's pervaded the West because of liberal democracy, you almost have to embrace this sort of Germanic idealism, this sort of greater collective that you may be a part of. To really embrace human nature, you have to almost see yourself as part of a collective, because it seems like time and time again, you have egalitarians or liberals or classic liberals, or maybe even as far as libertarians, who tend to be nihilists. And then on the opposite side, you see nationalists who are full of pride and joy, and they tend to be happier and healthier and are far more far-sighted into the future. They're more future-oriented, as Europeans and East Asians have been bred to be through evolution. So the cure to the black pill, the nihilism, the self-hatred, the guilt, the suicidal thoughts, is to take the white pill, the one of an idealistic future, a utopian vision for your people and for your descendants to live in. Embracing your identity and your cultural lineage, your heritage, the shared group consciousness that you are a part of, seems to be the cure for this sort of New Age Western nihilism that only pervades the Western world and parts of East Asia, but similar liberal democratic thought, I would say, or crushing Marxism, all similar leftist thought. This is, of course, my primary rejection of liberalism, is that it's soul-crushing. Marxism puts the boot of nihilism on the back of your neck and just crushes you into the ground before it shoots you in the back of the head. This has been a very long read for me and a very long series of videos for you all, and if you've made it this far, I greatly appreciate that you would spend time with me in delving into this very strange subject, I'm aware, but I think it's important if we're going to understand what must be done in the future to preserve ourselves. That being said, thanks for sticking around and thanks for listening.